Well, it's been a while since the last season, but now we've finally reached the end of the Peter Davidson Doctor Who era. He was advised to do no more than 3 seasons, but apparently he decided to leave the fans wanting a lot more. Let's get started. First, Tegan, Turlough, and the Doctor land on Earth in 2084. Assuming I'm still alive, I'll be 99. Unfortunately, there's been another kerfuffle with 2 superpowers. They don't really say who, but everybody's white. Well, yeah, everybody's white. So who knows who's started what. The TARDIS lands inside an underwater facility, which I think might have partially inspired Subnautica. I'm not sure. It's just something about the way the undersea base looks. Anyway, it seems it's an outpost armed with missiles to help defend against enemy missiles. Unfortunately, the Silurians are back, and they've hooked up with the Sea Devils. And their plan is to take over this base and use the missiles to start another world war. And just let everyone kill themselves. And when the smoke clears, they'll be able to restore the planet's surface and take over again. It seems the last 2 times the Silurians and Sea Devils have been burned by humanity without the Doctor's influence. Or should I say, despite the Doctor's influence. It left them kind of bitter. So even when the Doctor makes contact, nobody is willing to listen. Meanwhile, man's inhumanity to man has reared its ugly head when it's discovered that there are 2 spies for the other side on the base, using a mind manipulation device to trick one of the techs into wrecking the place. And this tech is important. Without him, the missiles won't fire. So far, there have only been practice runs, but it looks like this time it's going to be for real. The Silurians invade using their Sea Devil brethren as shock troopers, because there are only like 3 Silurians available. Apparently one of them is a survivor of the first encounter, way back in the Pertwee era. And they've brought a miniature sea dragon that they've genetically modified to deliver fatal electric shocks to people who touch it. And it can break down through the heaviest blast doors, so the base is quickly overrun. People get killed. One of the spies gets killed when she tries to karate fight the guy, the dragon. And the Doctor resorts to threatening the Silurians and Sea Devils because there is a gas on board the station that reacts violently to sea life, with fatal consequences. Unfortunately, by the time the Doctor and the surviving spy managed to deactivate the computer once the Silurians had fixed and programmed it for ultimate destruction, there's no one left standing. Just the Doctor, Tegan, Turlough, and the lone spy. And in the end, the Doctor walks among the corpses and laments, "There should have been a better way." Well, that was a fun start to the season. Let's move on. Next, they finally make it back to 1984 in a humble little village that periodically celebrates a massacre where rebels and troops fought, because that's what rebels and troops do, resulting in the destruction of the whole village. And everyone's involved. They're dressed in period clothes, they're acting like it was the 1640s, which is when this massacre supposedly happened. And yet, one lady decides she's not going to play. And it's good, because the local lord is acting like a local jerk. He's unnaturally aggressive. I mean, even for the period he's depicting. And his so-called knights are just as brutish. Needlessly so. Anyway, the Doctor and Team TARDIS have arrived because Tegan's grandpa, or great-uncle, no, grandpa, lives in the village and is studying the local legends to see if there's a kernel of truth behind what happened back in the day. Apparently there was some sort of entity called Malice. Was it Malice? Anyway, it was Malice. And supposedly that had something to do with what happened. Unfortunately, for no apparent reason, the local lord and his so-called knights decide to become hostile to the Doctor and Team TARDIS for no apparent reason. And they inform Tegan that her grandpa is missing. Turns out he got a little too close to the truth and was locked away. We later find him stuck in a barn. Also, there's these strange hallucinations plaguing the townsfolk, and even Tegan sees something. An old guy with digital sparkles all around him, a guy dressed in period clothes wielding a sword, and eventually, out from behind a boarded up wall entrance comes a kid from 1643 who apparently witnessed the battle and got the heck out of Dodge because he didn't want to be a part of it. And eventually, the church where they find the boy starts to collapse, and a huge demonic-looking face emerges from one of the walls. Apparently, that's the Malice, an entity that feeds off psychological energy, making people more aggressive, more deranged, and it plans to drain dry the whole town. Luckily, the Doctor and Team TARDIS figure out a way to cut the creature off from its food supply by locking its true form, which is more lizard imp-ish, inside the TARDIS. And it manages to partially starve. Unfortunately, it doesn't go down for long. It manages to redouble its efforts, making the local lord go crazy and threaten to shoot everybody. But then the kid out of time, he pushes the local lord into the mouth of the larger version of the creature that's stuck in the wall, which causes it to spasm and blow up the church. Thankfully, everyone got out in time. And the village, which was inexplicably cut off from the rest of the world, is freed. And the reluctant allies of the local lord apologize for nearly getting everyone shot, or in Tegan's case, burned at the stake, because apparently that was part of the ritual. And after a while, Tegan starts to doubt whether or not she wants to keep traveling with the Doctor. But eventually she relents and decides to keep traveling. So after they drop off the kid out of time, they end up on the planet Frontios, not to be confused with Bacchios. I have been waiting to do that joke. It's an Earth colony, one of the few surviving people of Earth, or some of the few surviving people of Earth, having crash-landed on the planet after Earth suffered a cataclysm. Again. Man, they run into a lot of these cataclysm colonies. Unfortunately, these people are at war. They just lost their leader, and the leader's son is inexperienced. His helpers are just barely managing to hold everyone together. And the Doctor and Team TARDIS are blamed for a bombardment of meteorites and sentenced to die. Luckily, the Doctor and his friends managed to convince the local enforcer to spare them. And eventually, after several disappearances, it's discovered that these arthropods the size of small humans, well, 5.5 foot tall humans, are digging the planet, creating some sort of gravity device that will move the planet itself. And the reason people have been disappearing is because they've been kidnapping the people to use as drivers for their digging equipment. And the worst part is they're literally plugged into the devices, used up, and eventually their remains are tossed aside like so much trash. Eventually the Doctor and Team TARDIS unearthed this little fact, and even though it's a bit of a struggle, they find out that the lead arthropod is the one responsible for galvanizing the other ones. The other ones used to be harmless burrowing insects. So once the TARDIS, which had been blasted apart earlier in the serial, gets pulled back together, them having found it in bits and pieces in the cave where the arthropods are working, they teleport away, which cuts off the connection between the head arthropod and his minions, rendering the minions harmless and the arthropod unconscious. So in order to prevent the arthropod from being a nuisance, they send it to a desolate planet where it can live out its life. And the Doctor asks that the colonists keep the whole matter hush-hush because technically he's gone about as far as he can go future-wise. And he technically wasn't supposed to be there. So he asks that the colonists keep the whole matter hush-hush, especially from the Time Lords, because they wouldn't like the fact that he interfered. Next, the Doctor and Team TARDIS go back to 1984 and land in a slum near the Tower Bridge in London. And something really bad is happening. Apparently, they were planning to knock down the old slums and put up new flats. But then they found something that looked like unexploded bombs, so they brought in some specialists. Unfortunately, the specialists vanished, and then inexplicably a crew of spacefarers showed up. trying to escape from bobbies, of all people, who proceed to kill all of them, including some hapless witness who was just having a smoke. Apparently these bobbies are from either the future or another planet or something, and they were doing some kind of dirty deeds, and didn't want any witnesses. Eventually, when Team TARDIS show up, they run afoul of some soldiers who are conducting an investigation, complete with their own science nerd, a lady. And then it's revealed that the Daleks are behind the whole thing. They've taken over a ship, and they're using time quarter technology to go back and forth between the empty buildings and their ship. Furthermore, they take down a space station, which is actually a prison, and their leader, Davros, is the one prisoner in the base. And despite the space station crew's efforts, the humans on the station are captured or killed. And some of the soldiers, as well as the police, have been replaced with exact duplicates, which is how they've been doing what they've been doing. They've even got human-looking troops wearing helmets that make them look like Dalek samurai. And honestly, they don't look too silly. This particular episode, or this particular serial, is pretty rough. We see a lot of innocent people get killed. Tegan gets put through the ringer. And eventually, Davros, who's played by a new actor who makes him sound a little more like Davros, and even has his voice properly modulated, plans to help the Daleks who've lost their war with the Movalans due to a virus by getting rid of all the past Daleks and starting over from scratch. And he is clearly unhinged. 90 years have passed since he got put in deep freeze, and apparently he was conscious for all of it. And his revenge for the indignity is take over the universe, of course. Luckily, the Doctor and Team TARDIS managed to just barely win the day with the help of some of the few remaining humans. And even one of the duplicates who betrays Davros. Because the duplicates are actually unstable and will start to assert their past individuality, which results in them sort of bouncing back and forth between helping and hindering. Eventually, the virus that the Movalans created is released on the space station, and the Daleks are destroyed, both there and back at the London slum, with more virus. And even Davros' chair stops working properly, so he fails to get away before the whole space station gets destroyed by one of the duplicates that went unhinged. But not before the duplicate that pretended to be a police chief and two of his bobbies make it back to Earth to cause trouble. They're out there somewhere. Dun dun dun. Not to mention the Supreme Dalek informing the Doctor that there are duplicates all over the world, and maybe they'll reassert their past selves, or maybe not. Who knows? It's possible the Dalek was bluffing, but you never know who might be a duplicate. Heck, one of their plans was to copy the Doctor and his companions and send them back to Gallifrey to assassinate the High Council. A bit of a revenge for trying to unmake them back in the T. Baker era. But once the space station blows up, it takes the Dalek ship with them, and the day is saved, although Tegan has had enough. Innocent people have died. The Daleks have put the whole of Team TARDIS through a serious nightmare. And she's had enough. She decided to quit traveling with the Doctor because it's no longer fun. She even had to witness the nerd lady get shot like a dog. And while she will miss the Doctor and Turlough, she's going to go off and do her own thing now. As for the Doctor and Turlough, they head off, comforted in the knowledge that the Daleks have been dealt with yet again. It's possible that Davros is gone for good, supposedly, and that Tegan is safe and will live out her life, hopefully in peace. Next, the Doctor and Turlough end up going to a fiery planet that apparently was partially colonized by the people of Trion. None other than Turlough's people. Not on purpose, mind you. It seems Chameleon, the silver mimic robot encountered way back in the King's Demons, has decided to make his presence known by having a horrible reaction to something. It makes him scream. He was plugged into the TARDIS control console, and it causes the ship to travel. Meanwhile, on Earth, a team of divers has found some strange barbell-looking device in an old wreck. And the weird thing is, it has a symbol that matches a tattoo on the arm of a colonist on the Fire Planet and on Turlough's arm. And we get to meet Perpuglium Brown, also known as Perry, the stepdaughter of one of the divers, who's decided to go off and do her own thing. Of course, the stepdad prevents her, and she tries to swim to the shore when her stepdad leaves her stuck on a boat, and she nearly drowns. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Turlough go looking for the signal that caused Chameleon to go haywire, and they end up on Earth, I think near Sicily, right where Perry is currently drowning, just a few meters from shore. It seems she's not as good a swimmer as she thought. Turlough saves her, brings her aboard the TARDIS, and her distressed mind causes Chameleon to shift into a silver version of her stepdad. and regain his senses. Meanwhile, the Doctor, having collected the device that Perry stole in order to sell for walking around money, it's got some sort of data core. And while Turlough pulls the device out, trying to be secretive about it, the Doctor plugs it into the TARDIS, and it causes a short, which sends the TARDIS to the Fire Planet, where a group of colonists are in the middle of a religious conflict. It seems that the local priests are considering feeding non-believers to the volcano in order to appease their fire deity, which looks suspiciously like a guy in a thermal protection suit. Hint, hint. Meanwhile, the Master shows up in his TARDIS, which looks like one of the ruins of what used to be the colony. And he asserts his control over Chameleon again, taking his own face. And so he strongs-arm Perry into helping him. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Turlough end up meeting the descendants of the indigenous population, the aforementioned priest and his people, who 10 years prior pulled a barely alive child out of the wreckage of a spaceship that had crashed on the planet. A young man who was later revealed to be Turlough's brother, and the two of them turn out to be princes of Trion. Unfortunately, their dad was dethroned in a coup, and apparently Trion prisoners are sent to other worlds in order to, I don't know, do some sort of community service. Turlough was sent to Earth, his brother was sent to this world, but things didn't go the way they planned. The brother was sadly orphaned. He was the only survivor of that crash. But, luckily, the people of this world believe that the mark on his arm is a sign of religious significance, as the person they believed was a deity was actually a Trion scientist trying to tap a natural gas from the volcano for its restorative purposes. In fact, the priest, when he was a kid, met the scientist and was encouraged to breathe the fumes and was invigorated by them. That's what the structures where the people are fed to the volcano were originally for. They weren't supposed to be burned. They were supposed to be given gaseous restorative. So there's a whoops. Heck, the film even starts with two unbelievers who go to the top of the volcano and looked for the technician, but no one was there. Meanwhile, the Master and his unwilling accomplice try to get his TARDIS working with a piece of the Doctor's TARDIS that Perry stole in order to keep it from the Master. And eventually, through a case of mistaken identity, the Master is given full run of the place and orders the people to burn up the Doctor and Turlough. And in the process, the brother was shot. Luckily, the Doctor and Turlough figure out how the machinery that was left over by the Tryons works. And the gas restores everyone who was injured. Unfortunately, this gas is what the Master covets. See, apparently he was working on a new tissue compression eliminator, and it proved too powerful and it shrank him. Not enough to kill him, but it did cause him to scream. And his scream is what was transmitted through Chameleon, which started this whole mess. So, the Master and Perry, finally back in his TARDIS, reveal that the Master has shrunk, but he's still capable of controlling Chameleon, even though both the Doctor and Perry do have some strong influence on the robot. Perry, from the stress of her mind, stuck in a situation she doesn't understand fully, and the Doctor, because, well, he's a fellow Time Lord. Eventually, the Master does get restored, and while he's still in the gas stream, he's like, when I get out of here, you're gonna regret ever having messed with the Master. But he didn't realize that the gas was coming in pulses. So before he had a chance to step out, rejuvenated, the gas turns to straight up fire. And while he's in there, he begs the Doctor for help. But he could just stand there doing nothing. He ignores him, which is weird. I guess the stress of the situation with the Daleks and having decided to kill Davros directly affected him. Because he admitted that he should have destroyed the Daleks when he had the chance. It seems the Doctor is becoming less stable, as we'll soon see. So, with that, the Master is destroyed. Turlough takes command of the indigenous people, and he uses the remains of his father's ship to send a signal to the Tryons, because he and his brother are no longer in need of exile. He's allowed to come home. So he decides to send the TARDIS back to the Doctor so he and Perry can go off and have adventures. And Turlough leaves, finally going home to his people. Meanwhile, Perry, who wanted to travel in the first place, which is why she decided not to go home after spending time with her stepdad, decides to stay with the Doctor and do some traveling. Let's see if that comes back to bite her in the backside. After that, they head to a small planetoid called Androzani Minor, which is near Androzani Major. And they get caught in the middle of a serious bit of political intrigue. Because on Androzani Minor, a substance was discovered that, when refined, can stave off death itself. Basically prolong life. Make people just short of Time Lords. But instead of using it to cure the sick, the rich and powerful use the drug to stave off aging. The president of the planet, Androzani Major, he's in his 80s but looks 50. All because of that drug. And the head of the company that supplies the drug, Well, he's a right prat. He is awful. When his former business partner discovered that you can use androids to mine the substance, which is toxic in its pure form, he got faulty equipment that didn't let him know that there was going to be a mudslide, and on Androzani Major, mud comes from the boiling center of the planet, which basically scalded the poor guy to death. Well, nearly. So, the guy, whose name is Jack, decided to get his revenge. He used his androids as a private army to mine the substance and refine it. So now he supplies the drug to his former business partner, named Mortis. In exchange for gas weapons, which the company man has access to. Meanwhile, the company man is shutting down factories and mines in the western part of the planet and putting up new ones in the eastern side. And unfortunately, in this society, if you don't have a valid job, you get put in work camps. All on the eastern side of the planet. So he's basically committing slavery. Basically, both of these guys have become monsters. Although Mortis was pretty awful to begin with, and his associate, Jack, he wasn't that bad, but he's become like a bitter Phantom of the Opera type person after barely surviving his encounter with the boiling mud. Add to that, mercenaries who've been running guns and weapons for Mortis, and basically you've got a whole powder keg ready to go off. Unfortunately, the Doctor and Perry come across the substance for the drug in its pure form and are slowly being poisoned to death. And also come across the weapons that were meant for Jack. And they get intercepted by the military, who decide to execute them just for being there. They think they're the ones responsible. And even though it's obvious that they're innocent, they're going to kill them anyway. Luckily, or should I say unluckily, they were replaced with androids and brought to Jack, who acts in a very, very creepy manner towards Perry. Apparently, he was an intellectual who appreciated beauty, and when his looks were destroyed, it left him unhinged and totally obsessed with finding beauty. Ultimately, it all goes to pot. Jack's androids are destroyed by the army. The army moves in to try and seize the assets of both Jack and Mortis, who gets killed by Jack in revenge, finally. And all the gun runners are destroyed. And even the president gets killed earlier by Mortis. And to top it all off, his assistant, who is not as stupid as Mortis thought she was, takes over and seizes Mortis's assets. So after all that, the bad guys don't get anything. Except for Jack, who gets revenge and dies in the arms of his last surviving android after having a bit of a change of heart. He really is a tragic figure. Unfortunately, towards the end of the story, the Doctor and Perry are suffering from the ill effects of the poison, and the Doctor pushes himself to the limits and beyond in order to get the cure. Milk from a queen bat in the very bottom of the caverns. But he just manages to get enough for Perry, who he cures, but finally starts to experience death. And in his death throes, he sees his past companions urging him not to die, but then he sees the Master urging him to die. But thankfully, he doesn't. At the last second, he manages to regenerate into Colin Baker, who sort of insults Perry and says that a change has come, and not a moment too soon. Bringing us to the first Colin Baker story, The Twin Dilemma. Now, the reason I decided to show you this episode now is because the first Colin Baker story started at the end of the Peter Davidson season. And it was not technically part of the first season of the Colin Baker era. Apparently, the producers wanted fans to get to know Baker before the season started proper. So, after this episode, or this serial, the show went on hiatus and then started a few months later. And since, similar to the original run, the new season of Doctor Who isn't coming out till October on Blu-ray, I decided to show you this episode now because I don't want to wait. It starts off with the Doctor insulting Perry a few times, insulting his past incarnation a few times, having a bit of a manic fit, having a bit of a crazy fit, and even choking out Perry, thinking she's a evil fairy or an alien spy, and only his image in a mirror snaps him out of it. So Perry's gone from being the companion of a youthful gentleman to the Joker's sidekick, and the Joker does not treat his sidekicks very well. Eventually, they change clothes because they've been running around a cave the past serial, so they need a new duds. The Doctor's outfit is clownish, to say the least, and Perry's outfit, while is not terrible, is still pretty loud, but a decent match of blue and green, which the Doctor considers gross. He says yuck. Exactly how she described his outfit when he finished suiting up. Unfortunately, there's no time to settle because the Doctor has decided to repent for his treatment of Perry by going to Titan 3 in order to become a hermit, with her as his helpful. With her as his helper. This is where my mouth stops working. Unfortunately, Titan 3 is a little occupied at the moment. It seems some guy, who we later learn is called Asmiel, has kidnapped a couple of twins played by arguably not good actors, although personally I didn't think they were that terrible. and it seems they've been kidnapped and part of their memories wiped, because they're needed to calculate a special project for a giant humanoid slug called Mestor, who has forced his way in to become leader of the planet Joconda, dethroning Asmiel in the process. Unfortunately, Mestor does not look like a giant slug. I mean, he looks partially like a giant slug, but we see some cave paintings earlier in the show which tell me that the slugs were supposed to be a lot more slug-like. And certain implications of the supposed slime trails they leave behind leave not too much to the imagination and are extremely gross. Eventually, the Doctor and Perry are pulled into the situation when the twins, on their way to Joconda by way of Titan III, send a distress signal to the Earth Police, who send some ships, which are promptly destroyed by Mestor. Luckily, there's one survivor, a lieutenant, who threatens the Doctor because he thinks he's responsible. So the Doctor has Perry disarm the guy's gun. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Perry go exploring on Titan III, find their way into a structure that looks like it is natural but is really artificial. The base of operations for Mestor on Titan III. Eventually, the Doctor and Perry get captured, and we find out from the Doctor that Asmiel is actually one of his old mentors. Having used up all his regenerations, he decided to retire to run Joconda, but then the slugs showed up and, unknown to him, caused the planet to wither and die, which cut off the food supply. But then Mestor offered a way to get food to the Jocondan people by way of moving 2 planets from the outer orbit of Joconda to the same orbit as Joconda itself, except in different time zones, so that they could use those planets as greenhouses. You would think they would just use transmats and regular greenhouses in order to make it easier, but nope, they decided to move the planets themselves, which hopefully will get the same atmosphere as Joconda, allowing them to work as growth planets. And the twins, who are apparently math geniuses, are the ones who will calculate the means of moving the planets. Unfortunately, Mestor has zero respect for life. So besides killing those space police, all but one, as we know, he decides to kill the Doctor and Perry by having one of his bird minions, the Jocondans, set the Titan III base to self-destruct, and the Doctor and Perry just barely managed to get out. Meanwhile, the lieutenant has managed to locate a new outfit to replace his soiled police uniform, which just so happens to have the power pack for his gun in the pocket. Chance of chances. Wow. Eventually, the Doctor and Perry and the Lieutenant follow Asmiel's ship back to Jocanda, where Mestor is currently based. And he is a real monster. He executes a guy just for stealing food for his kids. Now, personally, I think he should have been put in jail and the food given to the kids. But nope. The family will starve just without their father. And yet, he wants to feed the Jokandan people. Oh yeah, he feeds the Jokandan people, all right. To the Jokandan people. He has the body of the dead guy put in cold storage in case they need his flesh to feed some slaves. Eventually, the Doctor realizes what's going on, and in another fit, tries to kill Asmiel. Luckily, things are sorted out, and the Doctor stabilizes, and they can get on with trying to save Jocanda. Turns out Mestor's people were an ancient curse when the Jocandans angered the sun god. Now, whatever did happen, it wasn't that. Perhaps the slugs were just traveling and found a planet to settle on. But unfortunately, the mucus trails they leave killed the planet slowly. Meanwhile, it's soon revealed what Mestor's plan is. He's not going to use those planets for growing food. In a bit of faulty logic, the smaller planets are going to be pulled into the Jokandan sun when they get moved, which will cause the planet to explode, the sun to explode, excuse me, and destroy all the planets. Meanwhile, the gastropod eggs, that's what the slugs are called, will survive, and the intense heat of the supernova will give them the energy they need to hatch, spreading the gastropods all throughout the universe. Yep, it's basically Davros' plan. Take over the universe, of course. Luckily, through a bit of cleverness, the Doctor's allies managed to free the twins, get their memories back, and distract the enemy troops long enough for the Doctor and Asmiel to corner Mestor in his throne room. Unfortunately, when the Doctor throws a vial of chemicals at Mestor, he has a shield to protect him, which angers Mestor, the attempt, to the point where he he decides to demonstrate what he's going to do to the Doctor in order to get rid of him. He's basically going to take over the Doctor's mind and use his body as a new vessel, because his body is rather limited. And the Doctor manages to provoke him into demonstrating this on Asmiel, who reveals, since he's got just a little bit of strength left, that Mestor is now vulnerable. So, once again, the Doctor throws a vial of chemicals, and Mestor's body is destroyed. But he's still inside Asmiel's body. What can he do? He wills himself to die. That's what he does. And as he dies, Nestor is exorcised, and the Doctor gives him a bit of a eulogy in a very decent moment. And with that, the day is saved. The lieutenant decides to retire from being a cop, and the Doctor gives him the special ring which grants him dominion over Jocanda. The twins are returned to their world, and the Jocandan people start to rebuild, because without the slugs, hopefully their world will bounce back. Worlds are good at bouncing back. Ours has bounced back plenty of times. And after a bit of sass from Perry, the Doctor sasses right back. And with that, the Davidson era of Doctor Who comes to an end, and the Colin Baker era begins. When next we meet, the Doctor will be hopefully a little less of an acerbic extrovert and a little less crazy. Here's hoping. Until then, that is to say until October, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you that Colin Baker is the Doctor, whether you like it or not. Excelsior!